When I get invited to sessions like this, it's often my role to take a big zoom out, share what we're seeing, what's real, what's not, what's happening, how people are being successful, where they're stubbing their toes, and how we as a collective partnership ecosystem can make the most of this moment. And this moment tends to shift and change just about every day. One of the things I'm finding is that there's this great Yogi Berra quote, prediction is very difficult, especially if it's about the future. I'm finding actually what's more realistic is understanding the present is very difficult because it feels like the future. I mean, I put a deck together for this presentation a week ago that was completely out of date by the time it came to present today, and I had to rewrite everything last night. I'm not kidding. That's a real, not because I was lazy about it, because so many new things happened in the last 7 or 10 business days. It's pretty crazy, and I think what we're finding here is the wait and see moment is really over, and we're very much in the phase of did you see this? So just by a show of hands, raise your hand if you've received a chat, email, or text in the last 7 days that was something to the extent of, have you seen this? And it was some AI article, story, breakthrough, whatever. All right, keep your hands up. In the last 2 days, have you gotten one of those? Today, have you gotten one? Maybe one. Did you send one from Will Granis' presentation earlier this morning? He's pretty good. Will's pretty good. But what we can't lose sight of is the fact that this technology is really the most effective when it's augmenting people. Despite the novelty, despite the breakthroughs, despite the capability of frontier model labs and for agentic harnesses and SaaS layers that are being built on top of all this remarkable technology, it still remains just about people. And I'll share with you what I mean. This is my mom. When I was a freshman in college, Penn State, go Lions, anybody who? One woo, good. Thank you. I was packing up my dorm room at the end of my freshman year, and I got a phone call. And it was both my parents on the phone. Do you guys remember this in the days of landlines when it was like one parent would pick up the living room and the other one was in the kitchen? My parents never did this, so I knew kind of something was up. They asked me how I was doing, how the pack-up was going, when I was going to get home. We had some plans that evening. And they said, Aaron, Mom's sick. It turned out that she was diagnosed with cancer a week prior. And they said, look, we're going to need you to stay home this summer. I had other plans. And we're going to focus on helping Mom get better. I took that news. I got home. We spent the summer focusing on her care. And she fought really hard. But by Thanksgiving of that year, she was gone. Now, if you fast forward 25 years later, has anyone here heard of an organization called ASCO, American Society of Clinical Oncologists? So ASCO is an organization that is really focused on bringing information and putting it in the hands of oncologists who can go and save lives. Help to figure out what is the newest treatment, what is the opening clinical trial, what is new opportunities and patterns of care that maybe historically weren't available to us even a few months ago. And there's this great stat, or not so great stat, but a remarkable stat, that the vast majority, more than 75% of oncology treatments are misaligned to the patient's presentation, meaning there's a big information gap here. So we actually started working with ASCO a couple of years ago to take all of the information in their clinical trial databases, all of their findings, all that big unstructured data, and put it in a place so that any doctor anywhere could ask a question and say, this is my patient, this is how they're presenting, this is what we've tried so far, this is what we could do, and get recommendations in real time to help them provide better care and hopefully save more lives. And I can't help but think, if this had existed when my mom was diagnosed, maybe she'd be here now. Maybe she would have met my kids. So when I say that this technology is really most effective when it's augmenting people, I mean it. You guys still with me? All right. So zooming out to the broader trends that are happening here in the market, essentially there's 5 things that we can kind of think about as categorical to any organization in any vertical or sort of industry or sub-industry. First and foremost, I think is the most common trend we've all seen, which is organizations have largely moved away, at least in focus, from chatbot-oriented types of experiences toward allowing that large language model to have access to tools, access to data, and enabled to perform a business process in an agentic fashion. We're seeing our most sophisticated customers look at their existing business processes, the constraints of those processes, the outcomes they expect, and putting models and agentic harnesses to work to solve real business problems, usually in 2 categories. Either it's to create scale, right, to do something, to create more outcomes with fewer people or less human capital, or to create a net new business line. Go and approach some market opportunity that historically was inaccessible to them because it was too expensive or too time-consuming to do. The second, the creative revolution is fully here. Any marketer who's really focused on this area is seeing massive gains by being able to look at multiple methods of communicating the same idea personalized to the individual. So when you see that ad, the imagery and the video and the audio and the text is conforming to you in some way, which is, of course, raising the efficacy of that advertising, making it more interesting to you, and increasing your likelihood to transact or buy or perform whatever the action of merit may be. Google is obviously leading in this space, not just because of our heritage in the advertising space, but also our native multimodality in our models with image generation and video generation. Third is in physical AI. So we're seeing organizations that have large real-world footprints, manufacturing, transportation, logistics, look at the translation layer between models and actual physical action through robotics or understanding physical space. Google is making big strides here. The Waymo business is growing like gangbusters now. We're in more than 25 cities across the US. It's a massive revenue stream for us at the Alphabet level. And this was all rooted in our understanding of multimodal AI and the relationship with robotics and large language models. Multimodal reasoning to ensure that models are able to see, hear, and in some cases feel what the human does to provide greater context to their recommendation or the action. And then lastly, and this is the one I'm very personally passionate about, if any of you guys know me from previous presentations, the Apple story, all that stuff, it really is true that employee fluency is the foundational bedrock to any opportunity for a company. If your CEOs are not using AI every day, if your business line leaders are not using it every day, it will be very difficult for you to be authentic and deliberate in creating new experiences for your customers, for your ecosystem partners, and your broader constituencies. So investing in the people, investing in the culture oriented around using these tools, and creating processes that are AI native and returning to those processes on a daily basis or a weekly basis is the jet fuel. Humans are the center of all of this. It's not just about the tools. And there's this great quote, as these models became even more sophisticated, let's say in the last 6 to 8 months, there's this great quote from Shelley Palmer, which says, the atomic unit of work has shifted from the deliverable to the decision. What do I mean by that? What is the deliverable? The deck, the proposal, the analysis, the point of view, the project plan. If these things can be created like that, it allows you to live on the frontier of decision making. And if you have a foundational commitment to employee AI fluency, you can live on that frontier every single day. We're doing this at Google. My team is running AI native processes around forecasting, customer engagement, analysis of market trends. This is allowing us to live right up here at the present. Massive, massive opportunity that is human-led. So there is a paradox here. Andrew McAfee, very often cited MIT economist and professor, points out that just because technology is available doesn't necessarily mean that it can actually drive change, right? And why is that the case? I love this chart. It feels sort of academic, but bear with me for a second. If you have seen this, you probably know the story. If you haven't, if you look at the green curve, this is basically what we're experiencing every day with the have you seen this moments. Every single day, every single week, there's something novel, something useful, something creative for us to consider adopting. But That is not the same rate of change as companies being able to ingest that capability and put it to work, right? So there's this big gap, and the gap is widening because more stuff just keeps on coming out, and people still remain people. Companies still remain companies. And what's really gives me some optimism about agentic workflow is this notion of composability. So in the past, the way that software was developed and distributed was an engineer and a product manager decide a certain set of capabilities. That capability is shipped, perhaps it's customized through systems integration, and then you wait for the next update in the next cycle. So that means the company has to conform to the software. It has to conform itself to the technology, right? What's new now is composability, where our most sophisticated customers are building, AI native software development life cycles and factories, looking at business processes, looking at the data, building custom bespoke agents, and putting them out into the world in hours, not days, not weeks, not months, hours. Testing it, getting feedback, running in production, and then creating a recursive loop around that cycle. So this is a massive unlock and such a huge opportunity for every single person in this room who's in a services-oriented business or in a technology-first ISV-centric business, because this is just fundamentally changing, and we're seeing it in the results of our customers. And what are kind of the 3 lessons learned? Like, what can we take with us to maximize that opportunity? Well, first is anchor in value and prioritize with precision. Again, coming back to the theme of novelty, almost every conversation I'm in with a customer usually starts with a solution seeking a problem. Hey, I've heard about this new capability. How can I apply it to X? That is the dead wrong way to solve the issue. Start with, what is it that I need to fix now? What is my board level priority that's in my 3-year plan, my 5-year plan, that technology may be appropriate for? That is the right mindset. You will fall into traps, you will waste money, and you will waste time with solutions seeking problems and chasing novelty. There's no shortage of novelty in this moment in the market. Second, a unified and secure foundation. Everyone loves to talk about how AI is only as useful as the data you feed it. This tends to be pretty true. So ensuring you have the right structural foundations in place to be able to give agents things like context so that they can perform more sophisticated actions at greater scale with greater reliability. As you move up the curve of what you're trusting automation to do, data becomes a pretty foundational element of that. Lastly, cultivate enterprise-wide AI fluency. Pretty critical here as well. And these are conversations we've been having at Google for 10 years. I can see Miles Ward here in the crowd. Miles, you and I were talking about this 10 years ago, and here we are still preaching the very same story to our customers and to our partners and ISVs. The uncomfortable truth about all of this is, upon reflection, many of our customers are still very early days, sort of the vast majority in this initial and exploration phase, which again is a massive opportunity for you all to help them accelerate. And the barriers are, fairly intuitive. It's, we didn't start with a fresh sheet of paper. We've been a company for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. So this integration challenge is massive. The companies who are kind of the most ahead of the curve, like, did anybody, here we're going to play this game. Did anybody see this? Did anybody see the blog post from the CEO of Replit, the self-driving company? They're literally creating full automation across every function of the business. And that sounds cool if you're an engineering-focused company that actually builds software for engineers. Like, that makes sense for you to do that. It's also sort of a position of luxury. Most customers are legacy businesses. Even if they were digital native and software first, there's still a lot of decisions that were made decades ago, years ago, that have to be contended with to take advantage of the opportunity. Of course, security, privacy, and compliance is going to be critical as agents and LLMs become more independent in providing outcomes. Data access, governance, of course, is critical. And lastly, this fragmentation and vendor sprawl, kind of just making sense of all the different things that are out there and trying to find a harmonization motion takes time, takes effort, takes human capital. And what we're finding is there's essentially 5 layers in our experience of compounding advantage, starting with your proprietary data flywheel. These are reoccurring themes, coming back to employee productivity, embedding it into process, building net new workflows that are AI native, and forcing people to come back to those processes rather than sort of choosing whether or not to engage or not. building customer experiences so that your brand externally is represented through this capability, and then really enhancing and speeding up your organizational metabolism. So as you build these muscles, as you think through these new patterns, you will be able to make decisions faster and adopt tools more quickly. All right. So one of the things that I've been reflecting on, I know that I'm in a room full of people who make a lot of slides for a living, many of us, right? So you're probably like, okay, cool, thanks for the theory. And maybe some of us just came for to see the new toys, to see the cool tech and the cool stuff. Anyone here in that category who just wants to see the cool stuff? Yeah, a few, okay. So what I've noticed in the last, let's say, 6 weeks is the speed in which the integration between Google DeepMind and Google Cloud has really picked up. In other words, they are building capabilities in their labs that are being surfaced through commercial distribution channels in a much faster and more recursive loop than ever before. Are you folks, upon reflection, let me just ask a question here to the group. Think of, maybe you have a child, or maybe you know a young person who is in some way better than you. Yeah? Like my daughter knows the answer more often than I do. Maybe they're smarter, maybe they're kinder, maybe they're better at sports. This is a result, to a certain degree, of biological evolution, of traits being passed from generation to generation, surviving, being emphasized, and being propagated. What if we could take the same engine that drives biological evolution and apply it to really complicated business problems? Like the most challenging business problems that exist in the global economy are largely optimization related. So for example, for us, running a data center, maximizing throughput, maximizing power efficiency is a multi-billion-dollar outcome based on, tenths of a percentage point. The same is true if you were in drug discovery or molecular research, figuring out the stability of a protein. Or maybe you're just, shipping soda and potato chips all over the country and you're trying to save money on gas and driver time, right? These are all massive optimization problems that are, vastly improved if you can build the right tool set to improve them incrementally and with control. So what Alpha Evolve does is it brings all the principles of biological evolution to the notion of understanding and evolving algorithmic optimization. And I'm going to show you an example of this in a second. I recently met with, actually earlier this week, with the CEO of a large healthcare system based here in the Northeast, and he was reflecting that they are currently operating on a 0.5% margin profile. And globally, in the US, more than 25% of hospital revenue is lost to waste and fraud. So this year, that means between $750 and $920 billion in waste across the system that we rely on to provide care for our families, for ourselves, and serve communities in the most difficult moments of their lives. So could we help them optimize how they reduce that waste to find more money for outcomes that actually help people? These are the problems that we're so excited to solve at Google, right? So what DeepMind created with Alpha Evolve is this system that can ingest the algorithm that is used for this type of work. So what you're seeing here, I'm going to kind of walk you through this. So this is a graph database. And rather than force investigators to kind of parse through data files and spreadsheets, we worked with this customer to translate that into a graph database in Spanner. So if you're thinking, what's in it for me as a systems integrator? Data readiness, right? Huge opportunity here. And what we did was create this web of patient episodes, diagnosis codes, procedure codes, prescribed medications, and specialty peer group baselines. And this graph is essentially the structural data feed that our evolutionary agents are going to consume to pull data points into their connections into the models. Okay, so on the right, if we get into the optimization tab, You're going to see the metadata that surrounds this particular practitioner. This is Dr. Gabriel Riley. You can see it up here on the top right here. And we're going to start to run an evolutionary candidate generator. So what this is going to do is look at the algorithm, look at the data points that construct that algorithm, look at the mathematical equations that make sense of the connections, look at the weighting, and it's going to start to mutate it. So you start with a static algorithm, and then we find one small change, and then it runs through an evaluation agent to say, does this make a net improvement? So actually, I'm going to run that in real time right now. And our target output is an F1 confidence score of 94%. F1 confidence represents not only the accuracy of the algorithm, but also its ability to reliably predict the past. So you can sort of bet on its ability to predict into the future. So if I run this recursive evaluation loop, what the system is now doing is ingesting the algorithm, changing it in some small way, testing it again, and if it's improved, it's passing along that genetic heritage down to the next evolutionary change. And then it's testing it again, and testing it again, and testing it again, and testing it again. And what you start to see by the end of this trial run is a growth from the baseline, which was, 45%, all the way up to 94%. So it worked, it did its job. But if we get into the emulator, that's where it gets a little bit more kind of interesting. So what the system will do is build a phylogenetic tree that traces the genetic lineage of the code and differences in their mutations. And each node, as it starts to loop, is essentially a new candidate algorithm. And these nodes that are being generated are kind of like offspring. Each have similarities and differences in their mutations. And as it finds a mutation that tends to kind of improve survivability and improve traits, it'll communicate it. So think about this back in evolutionary terms. The people who maybe were more careful around fire and pointy objects tend to survive to the next generation. In this case, this mutation of the algorithm found that a relationship between the total build amount and the diagnostic provider's specialty was a very meaningful connection that should evolve into the next algorithm and then test against it even further. So it's going to resume that evolutionary loop. And as AlphaEvolve continues to evaluate, it's either going to branch or trim or prune the model based on performance. Some bloodlines die, some bloodlines propagate. And as those decisions are made, you will continue to see AlphaEvolve provide insight into why certain mutations won out, which is a really important step in traceability and kind of model explainability. A lot of questions we get asked from regulators, for example, is why did the model do what it did? So in this case, time in ICU evaluation was really important for a certain CPT code. So the model continues, and as these new generations continue to pop up, as it explores more of the data space, more simulations are tested in real time. And ultimately, this will continue until the champion algorithm is chosen and proven at the 94% F1 score. So this sounds like data science mumbo jumbo to some, but this is tens of billions of dollars for customers who think about optimization every single day in their world. And what we've found since releasing AlphaFold, this is GA as of last week. We had some testing partners. BASF improved their planning and forecasting model by over 80%. Klarna in the financial services space doubled training speed to improve performance for their foundation models. If your customers are doing their own creation of open source models, for example. WPP in the advertising space delivered a 10% lift in prediction accuracy, and Kinaxis improved their forecasting accuracy by 22 points. So these are meaningful, real-world outcomes to using agents that DeepMind has developed, surfaced into Gemini Enterprise, and applied to algorithmic optimization at scale. This is moving the needle for our customers in ways that foundationally improve their ability to compete, survive, and build the next generation of themselves. So with that, I'm going to pause. Thank you so much for the time today. It was a real pleasure to see you all.